The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in November 1998. Charles Bronson stood at the window of his Malibu home, watching the Pacific waves crash against the rocks below. The hospice nurse had left it on the kitchen table, a yellowed envelope with no return address, just a name written in shaky handwriting, for Charlie Bukinski. He hadn't heard that name in 50 years, Bukinski. The name his father carried from Lithuania, the name etched on a wooden cross in a Pennsylvania cemetery, the name he buried when he became Bronson. His fingers, weathered by time and illness, trembled slightly as he picked up the envelope. Not from age, not from the cancer slowly consuming his lungs, but from something else, something older, something that had been waiting in the shadows for half a century. The postmark read, Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. Of course, it always came back to Ehrenfeld. He didn't open it, not yet. He simply held it against the morning light, as if trying to see through the paper, through time itself. Outside, a seagull cried. The sound echoed against the glass walls of his home, this palace by the sea, so far from the coal-blackened hills where everything began. No one knew the truth, not his wives, not his children, not the millions who had watched his stone face on screens around the world. But someone remembered. And now, after all these years, they had written. Charles Bronson was 77 years old. His face, that famous face, carved as if from granite, had softened with age but never lost its intensity. The deep-set eyes still carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. The jaw, once clenched in defiance against poverty, against Hollywood, against life itself, now held a different kind of tension. The quiet acceptance of a man who knew his time was running short. The Malibu house was beautiful. Glass and wood and light. A far cry from the cramped company house in Ehrenfeld, where he had slept with 5 brothers in a single room, where the coal dust seeped through every crack, where hunger was a constant companion. He remembered the cold. God, the cold. Pennsylvania winters cut through those thin walls like a knife. His mother, Mary, would stuff newspaper into their shoes to keep their feet warm. 15 children, 15 mouths to feed on a miner's wage. Sometimes, young Charlie would wake up in the middle of the night, his breath visible in the darkness, and wonder if he would ever feel truly warm. Now, the California sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. A fireplace crackled softly. The temperature was a perfect 72 degrees. But on mornings like this, when the fog rolled in from the ocean, he could still feel that Pennsylvania cold in his bones. He carried the letter to his study. The room was lined with memorabilia, posters from The Great Escape, Once Upon a Time in the West, Death Wish, awards, photographs with directors, co-stars, presidents, a lifetime of achievement framed and mounted on walls. But in the corner, away from the spotlight, sat a small wooden box, unpolished, unremarkable. The only thing he had brought from Ehrenfeld. Bronson lowered himself into his leather chair, the envelope still in his hand. His breathing was labored now. The lung cancer made even simple movements exhausting, but his eyes remained sharp, focused on the handwriting. He knew that handwriting, slanted slightly to the left, careful but imperfect. The letters pressed deep into the paper, as if written with great effort. Walter. The name surfaced in his mind like a body rising from deep water. Walter Bukinski, his older brother, the one who stayed behind when Charlie left for California. The one who went into the mines at 14 and never came out. Not really. The coal took something from him, just as it had taken their father. But Walter wasn't supposed to be alive. He had received word of his death 3 years ago, a quiet funeral in Ehrenfeld. Cancer, they said. The same disease now eating away at Charles himself. Yet, here was his handwriting. Unmistakable. Bronson stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached for the letter opener. Dear Charlie, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. But there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you 60 years ago, but I was too afraid. Too ashamed. Do you remember the night Pop died? November 14th, 1937. You were 16. I was 22. We were both in the mines that day. You remember the cave-in. You remember the darkness, the screaming, the dust. but you don't remember everything. There's a truth I've carried all these years, Charlie. A truth that's been eating me alive, worse than any cancer. And before I face whatever comes next, I need you to know. Come to Ehrenfeld one last time. There's something buried in the old mine, something that belongs to you. I'm sorry, brother, for everything. Walter Bronson read the letter twice, 3 times. His hands were shaking now, not trembling, shaking. The paper rustled in his grip like dry leaves in the wind. November 14th, 1937. He closed his eyes, and suddenly he was 16 again, thin, hungry, covered in coal dust, standing at the mouth of mine number 9, waiting for the men to come up. They had pulled his father's body from the rubble at dawn. But that wasn't the whole story. He knew that now. He had always known, somewhere deep in the part of himself he kept locked away. There's something buried in the old mine. What had Walter done? What had they both done? The housekeeper found him still sitting in his study 2 hours later. "Mr. Bronson, your medication." He looked up. For a moment, his expression was blank, as if he were looking through her, through the walls, through time itself. Then, his face reset into its familiar mask, the stone face that had made him famous. "Cancel my appointments," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I'm going to Pennsylvania." The housekeeper frowned. "Sir, the doctor said—" "I know what the doctor said." He rose slowly, using the armrest for support. "But there's something I need to do, before it's too late." She wanted to argue. Everyone always wanted to argue with him, doctors, agents, directors. But there was something in his eyes that stopped her. A finality. A quiet, terrible determination. She had worked for him for 12 years. She had never seen him look like this. "I'll arrange the flight," she said softly. Bronson nodded. He walked to the window, the letter still clutched in his hand. Outside, the fog was lifting, revealing the sharp blue line of the horizon. He thought of his father, of Walter, of the 16-year-old boy who had walked out of Ehrenfeld with nothing but the clothes on his back and a secret buried so deep he had almost convinced himself it didn't exist. Almost. Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. Population 212. The town had died slowly, the way coal towns do. First, the mines closed, then the stores, then the people, drifting away like leaves in autumn, leaving behind empty houses and overgrown streets. Bronson's rental car pulled up to what remained of Main Street, a single bar, a boarded-up church, a post office that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The driver, a young man from Pittsburgh who had talked excitedly about Death Wish for the first hour of the drive, was silent now. The poverty of the place had sobered him. "You sure this is right, Mr. Bronson?" "I'm sure." He stepped out of the car. The November air hit him immediately, cold, sharp, carrying the faint metallic smell of old industry. His lungs protested. He coughed, a deep rattling sound that echoed in the empty street. But he didn't get back in the car. Instead, he stood there, looking at the hills. The same hills he had roamed as a boy, the same hills that had swallowed his father, his brothers, his childhood. Now they were covered in brown grass and bare trees, like old men waiting to die. "Wait here," he told the driver. "This might take a while." The cemetery was smaller than he remembered, wooden crosses and simple headstones, many of them cracked and weathered beyond reading. The Bukinski family plot was in the far corner, near the rusted iron fence. Bronson walked slowly, each step a negotiation with his failing body. The ground was uneven, covered in dead leaves. Once he stumbled, caught himself on a headstone, and stood there for a moment, breathing hard. "This is what it comes to," he thought. Charles Bronson. Tough guy, can't even walk through a cemetery without losing his breath. But he kept going. His father's grave was marked with a simple cross, Walter Bukinski Sr., 1889-1937. Beloved husband and father. The wood was dark with age, the letters barely visible. Next to it, a fresh mound of earth, a new headstone, still white. Walter Bukinski Jr., 1950-1998. Rest now, brother. Bronson stood between the two graves, father and son, both taken by the same darkness, the mines, the coal, the poverty that had defined their lives. And him? He had escaped, made millions, became a star. But standing here in this forgotten cemetery, he didn't feel like a star. He felt like what he had always been underneath the fame. Charlie Bukinski, the poor kid from the coal country who had run away and never looked back. Until now. You must be him. The voice came from behind. Bronson turned, his hand instinctively moving toward his hip, an old reflex from too many Western films. A woman stood at the cemetery gate. She was in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face lined with the same hard years that marked everyone in this town. She wore a heavy coat and carried a bundle of flowers. "I'm sorry," Bronson said. "Do I know you?" "No, but I knew Walter." She walked toward him, her boots crunching on the frozen grass. "I was his nurse. At the end, he talked about you." "What did he say?" She stopped a few feet away, studying his face. "He said you'd come, sooner or later." She paused. "He said you'd have questions." Bronson's jaw tightened. "The letter mentioned something buried in the old mine." "Do you know what he meant?" The woman's expression flickered, something between fear and resignation. She glanced around, as if checking whether they were alone. "Mine number 9, she said quietly. "It's been closed since '58, sealed up. But Walter, he kept a way in, said there was something he needed to protect." She hesitated. "Something from that night, the night your father died." "What night? What really happened?" She shook her head. "That's not for me to say, Mr. Bronson, but if you want answers, they're down there." She pointed toward the hills. "The entrance is behind the old equipment shed. Walter kept it clear." Bronson followed her gaze. The hills looked darker now, the afternoon light fading. Somewhere up there, the mouth of mine number 9 waited. The same mine that had killed his father. The same mine that had haunted his dreams for 60 years. "Thank you," he said. The woman nodded. She placed the flowers on Walter's grave, crossed herself, and turned to leave. But at the gate, she paused. "Mr. Bronson?" "Yes?" "Walter loved you. Whatever you find down there, remember that. He did it to protect you." Then she was gone, her footsteps fading into the cold November air. The equipment shed was exactly where she said it would be. Bronson climbed the hill alone, refusing the driver's offer of help. This was something he needed to do himself. Every step was agony, his lungs burning, his legs screaming, but he kept going. The shed was a skeleton of rusted metal and rotting wood. Inside, among the debris, he found it, a wooden panel that moved when he pushed. Behind it, a narrow passage shored up with old timber leading down into darkness. He had brought a flashlight. He clicked it on and stood at the entrance, the beam cutting through the black. The smell hit him first, that coal dust smell. 60 years, and it was exactly the same. It transported him instantly, completely, back to 1937, back to the boy he had been. His heart was pounding now, not from exertion, from something deeper, fear, the primal childhood fear of the dark, of the earth closing in, of never seeing the sun again. But he stepped forward anyway. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders. The walls were close, pressing in. He could hear the creak of old timber, the drip of water somewhere ahead. His flashlight beam jumped and wavered as he walked. 50 feet in, the passage opened into a small chamber, and there, propped against the wall, was a box. Not a mining box, a personal one, wooden, with a brass latch covered in decades of dust. Bronson approached it slowly. He could hear his own breathing, loud and labored in the confined space. His shadow stretched across the chamber wall like a ghost. He knelt before the box. His fingers found the latch. It opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 things: a photograph, a miner's lamp, and a journal. The photograph showed 2 men in mining gear. Even in the dim light, Bronson recognized them. His father, Walter Sr., on the left, and next to him, a man he didn't know, younger, handsome, with a smile that seemed out of place in the grim setting of a coal mine. On the back, written in faded ink, Walter and James, brothers in the dark, 1936. James? Bronson didn't know any James. His father had never mentioned this man. In all the family stories, all the memories passed down, this face had never appeared. He set the photograph aside and picked up the journal. The pages were brittle, the handwriting cramped. It was his father's journal. He recognized the style from the few letters that had survived. He began to read. September 3rd, 1936. James came to the mine today, said he needed work. Company's not hiring, but I put in a word with the foreman. He's a good man, James. Reminds me of myself when I was younger, before the war, before everything. October 15th, 1936. James and I work the same shift now, the deep tunnels. Dangerous, but the pay is better. We talk during breaks. He's running from something. I can see it in his eyes. But aren't we all? December 24th, 1936. Christmas Eve. Mary made pierogies. Not enough for everyone, but the children didn't complain. James came for dinner, first time he met the family. Charlie, my youngest boy, took to him right away. They played cards by the fire. James let him win. Bronson's throat tightened. He remembered that night, the stranger at the table, the card game, the way the man had smiled at him, ruffling his hair before leaving. He had forgotten. For 60 years, he had forgotten. February 2nd, 1937. Something is wrong. The foreman knows. About James. About what he did before he came here. I don't know the details, but I can see the fear in James's eyes. He says they're coming for him. He says he needs to disappear. I told him I would help. God forgive me. The entries became more frantic after that. March 17th, 1937. Men came to town today, asked questions, looking for someone. I said nothing, but Walter Jr. was there. He saw my face. He knows I'm hiding something. June 8th, 1937. James is living in the old shaft, Tunnel 7. I bring him food when I can. The children are hungry, but I can't turn my back on him. He saved my life once, in the deep tunnels. The least I can do is save his. November 10th, 1937. They found him. I don't know how, but they found him. The men from the city. They're giving me a choice. Tell them where James is hiding, or they'll make sure my family never works in this town again. No work means no food. No food means, God help me. I don't know what to do. And then, the final entry. November 14th, 1937. It's done, I told them. Tunnel 7. They went in this morning. There was a cave-in. They say it was an accident. They say the timbers were old. But I saw the dynamite. I saw what they did. James is dead, and so is part of me. But my family will eat. My children will live. Walter Jr. helped me carry the secret. He's a good boy, stronger than me. I can't live with this. Tonight, I'm going back into the mine. I'm going to seal Tunnel 7 myself. And then, Mary, forgive me. Charlie, my youngest, when you're old enough to understand, know that everything I did for you. Even the terrible things. Especially the terrible things. A father's love is a heavy burden. I hope you never have to carry it the way I have. The journal ended there. Bronson sat in the darkness for a long time. The flashlight flickered. The batteries were dying. But he didn't move. He couldn't. His father hadn't died in a cave-in. His father had walked into the mine that night and never come back. Not because of an accident, because of guilt, because of a choice he couldn't live with. And James, this mysterious man, this friend, this stranger at the Christmas table, had been killed, murdered, in the same mine where Bronson had spent his teenage years, breathing the same air, walking the same tunnels. He thought of Walter Jr., his brother, carrying this secret for 60 years, working in the mines, watching their mother grow old, watching Charlie leave for California and become famous, become someone else entirely, while he stayed behind with the weight of what they knew. He did it to protect you. The nurse's words echoed in his mind. Protect him from what? From the truth? From the guilt? Or from something else? Bronson reached into the box again. His fingers found something he had missed, a smaller envelope tucked beneath the oilcloth. He opened it. Inside was a newspaper clipping, yellow and brittle. Wanted, James Edward Callahan. Murder. Armed robbery. Last seen in western Pennsylvania. Reward, $500. And beneath it, a note in Walter Jr.'s handwriting. Pop made a choice, Charlie. He chose us. He chose you. I know it was wrong. I know James deserved better. But Pop was just a man, a tired, desperate man trying to feed his family. I've kept this secret because I loved our father, and because I loved you. I didn't want you to carry this burden. You were the one who got out. You were our hope, our proof that a Buczynski could be something more than a miner. But now I'm dying, and the truth has to go somewhere. so I'm giving it to you. Do what you want with it. Bury it. Burn it. Tell the world. Just know that I forgive Pop, and I hope you can too. Your brother, Walter. Bronson emerged from the mine at dusk. The sky was a deep purple, streaked with orange where the sun had set behind the hills. Stars were beginning to appear, the same stars he had watched as a boy, lying in the grass behind the company house, dreaming of escape. He walked down the hill slowly. The box was under his arm, the journal, the photograph, the letter, all of it. The driver was waiting by the car, his breath visible in the cold air. "Mr. Bronson, are you okay? You were in there for hours." Bronson didn't answer. He stood at the bottom of the hill looking back at the mine entrance, that dark mouth in the earth that had swallowed so much of his family's history. What did he feel? Anger? At his father for making an impossible choice? Grief? For James Callahan, a man he barely remembered, buried in the darkness for 60 years? Relief? That the truth at last was known? He felt all of it and none of it. Mostly, he felt tired. A bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond his illness, beyond his age. The exhaustion of a man who had spent his entire life building walls, and now, in his final days, watched them crumble. "Take me to the hotel," he said finally. "I need to rest." That night, Bronson dreamed. He was 16 again, standing at the mouth of mine number 9. The sun was rising, painting the hills gold and pink. Miners were emerging from the shaft, their faces black with coal dust, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. His father was among them. But in the dream, Walter Sr. stopped at the entrance. He turned and looked at his son. And for the first time, Bronson saw his father's face clearly, not the stern, distant mask he remembered, but the face beneath it. The fear, the love, the terrible weight of choices made in the dark. "Charlie," his father said. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "I'm sorry." Bronson tried to speak, but no words came. He reached out, but his father was already turning, walking back into the mine. The darkness swallowed him. And then Bronson was awake, gasping, his heart pounding in his chest. The hotel room was silent. Moonlight streamed through the curtains. Outside, somewhere, a dog barked. He lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. "I forgive you, Pop." He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. The words existed in his chest, in the space where the anger had been. Not erasing the past, not excusing it, just acknowledging it. The impossible choices, the human frailty, the love that drove men to terrible things. For the first time in 60 years, Charlie Bukinski, not Charles Bronson, the actor, the tough guy, the stone face, felt something loosen inside him, something like peace. He returned to Malibu 3 days later. The doctors were furious. The trip had worsened his condition. His breathing was labored now, his strength fading. They gave him weeks, maybe less. But Bronson didn't regret it. He sat in his study, the box on the desk before him, the photograph of his father and James, the journal, the newspaper clipping, Walter's final letter. What would he do with them? Part of him wanted to burn it all, let the past die with him. Let the Bukinski secrets remain secrets. But another part, the part that had driven him up that hill, into that mine, into the darkness, knew that wasn't right. The truth had been buried too long. James Callahan had been forgotten too long. He reached for the phone. The reporter arrived the next morning. She was young, 30 maybe, with sharp eyes and a notebook always in hand. She worked for the Los Angeles Times, the entertainment section. She thought she was here for an interview about Bronson's career, a retrospective, a final look back before the end. She wasn't prepared for what he actually had to say. "Before we start," Bronson said, "I want to tell you a story, not about Hollywood, not about movies, about a town called Ehrenfeld, about a man named James Callahan, and about my father." She looked confused but nodded. "Okay." And so he told her. Everything. The journal, the secret, the cave-in that wasn't an accident, the guilt that had driven his father into the darkness, the brother who had carried the weight for 60 years. As he spoke, his voice was steady. The stone face was gone. In its place was something else, something raw and human and deeply sad. The reporter listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally. "Why now?" Bronson looked at the photograph on his desk. His father's face, James's smile. "Because everyone deserves to be remembered," he said. "Even the forgotten ones, especially the forgotten ones." The article was published 2 weeks later. It wasn't about Charles Bronson, the action star. It was about the Bukinski family, about coal country, about poverty and desperation and the terrible choices people make when they have nothing left, and about James Edward Callahan, the man who had been erased from history, buried in a collapsed mine shaft, forgotten by everyone except a guilt-ridden miner and his sons. The response was unexpected. Callahan's descendants, a granddaughter in Ohio, a great-nephew in California, came forward. They had spent decades wondering what happened to their ancestor. Now, at last, they knew. They didn't blame the Buchinksis. They understood. In coal country, in the Depression, survival wasn't a moral calculation. It was instinct. It was love twisted by desperation. The granddaughter wrote Bronson a letter. "Thank you for giving us James back. For 60 years, he was just a mystery, a gap in our family tree. Now he's a person again, a man who was kind to strangers, who played cards with a little boy on Christmas Eve, who died too young, but who lived, really lived, before the end. That's all any of us can ask for, isn't it?" Bronson read the letter sitting in his study, the winter sun streaming through the windows. He read it twice, 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the wooden box next to his father's journal. Charles Bronson died on August 30th, 2003. He was 81 years old. The cancer had taken its time, giving him 5 more years than the doctors predicted. 5 years of quiet mornings in Malibu. 5 years of watching the sunset over the Pacific. 5 years of peace. At his request, there were 2 funerals. The first was in Los Angeles, a grand affair. Colleagues, co-stars, directors, speeches about his career, his talent, his legacy, the stone face on the big screen one last time. The second was in Ehrenfeld. No cameras, no celebrities, just a small gathering at the cemetery where his father and brother were buried. A priest said a few words, a local choir sang hymns, and then, as the sun began to set over the Pennsylvania hills, they lowered a small urn into the ground. Not all of him, just a part, the part that had never really left. Charlie Bukinski, the headstone read, 1921-2003. He came home. There is a story they tell in Ehrenfeld now about a boy who grew up in the coal dust and shadows, who lost his father to the mines and his childhood to poverty, who walked away with nothing and returned, decades later, a legend. But that's not the whole story. The whole story includes a man named James Callahan. A choice made in desperation, a secret carried for 60 years, and a brother's love that transcended death. The whole story includes guilt and forgiveness, the weight of the past and the possibility of peace, the stone face and the broken heart beneath it. Charles Bronson spent his career playing tough guys, men who didn't flinch, men who didn't forgive, men carved from granite. But in the end, he was something else entirely. He was a son who loved his father, a brother who honored his family's truth, a man who learned in his final years that the hardest thing in the world isn't violence or vengeance. It's grace. The Malibu house is still there. New owners now. Different furniture, different art on the walls. The study where Bronson read his brother's letter has been converted into a home gym. The window where he stood watching the Pacific is just a window. But sometimes on foggy mornings when the light is soft and the world is quiet, you can almost feel something. A presence. A weight. The echo of a man who carried his past like a stone and, at the very end, found a way to set it down. In coal country, they say the dead never really leave. They stay in the earth, in the darkness, in the tunnels that snake beneath the hills. They wait. They remember. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear them. Not screaming, not crying, just breathing. The slow, steady breath of men who made impossible choices, who loved too much, who did terrible things for beautiful reasons. Charles Bronson understood this. In the end, we are all just miners in the dark, searching for light. Some of us find it, some of us become it. A man's past is not a burden to be discarded, but a foundation to be understood. Only then can he build something new.